Live from New York, here's the happy conservative warrior, Mike Gallagher.
Here's the blowback I get from daring to suggest that Ron Paul's candidacy is legitimate. Let's look at some of the comments. Debbie writes, Mike, dang it. This is on my Facebook fan page. Mike, dang it. Most of us are so sick of Ron Paul. You're cramming him down our throats. Well, it is your show. I love you. Just ugh. Sarah, Mike, I don't get your defense of Ron Paul. He's about 150 years old, severely anti-war, which with terrorist monsters behind every bush is terrifying. He's nuts and will lose to Obama for sure. And then here's Myron on the line who wants to know why I'm even talking about him. Myron, you don't think we even ought to discuss the guy who finished second place in New Hampshire?
No. He should be in the dustbin of history immediately because he is like Ross Perot. He's going to make us lose to Hussein. He is moving towards making Hussein a two-term president.
All right, okay, I got it. So let's bring in Doug Wead into this conversation because Doug Wead, presidential historian, has worked with many presidents. He's a philanthropist, best-selling author, and he's a Ron Paul supporter. So Doug, you know, as we continue this conversation about Ron Paul, you're hearing these calls and what people are saying to me. Ron Paul is nuts. He's too old. He's gonna. There's no way he could beat Barack Obama. What do you say to all the fierce criticism that your candidate gets?
Well, you asked several questions there. I'll take your last one first. The Washington Post ABC poll, the NBC Marist poll, the Rasmussen poll for 6 months. They've been showing this secret hidden in plain sight. When they ask in those polls, who do you think can win the nomination? Or they ask specifically, do you think Ron Paul can beat Barack Obama? The numbers of registered Republicans run around 9% and some 8% and others. That's what they think. Then in the same poll, they ask, would you vote for Barack Obama or Ron Paul? They ask it of all general election likely voters. And Ron Paul does better than all of the Republican candidates except Mitt Romney, and he's within 2 points, the statistical margin of error of Mitt Romney. And this has been going on for 6 months. To me, this is statistical proof that the news media is biased and bigoted to Ron Paul because people wouldn't think he's unelectable if if they knew what the polls said.
Well, I mean, and I just resent being told that something that appears to be a legitimate candidacy isn't legitimate just because somebody says so. I mean, but we're hearing some hyperbolic things. I mean, look at Mike here. Now, Doug, I could call you a lot of things. I don't think I'm going to call you dumb. You know, I think you're a smart guy. I know you're a smart guy. But Mike here, I want to bring a caller in. Mike says he can explain Ron Paul's popularity. A lot of young kids are just dumb. Let me get Mike into this. Mike, how are you?
How you doing, Mike? Love your show.
Thank you so much. Now, you think this is just a lot of stupid people following this guy?
Yeah, I don't want to use that term dumb. I just think a lot of the young under 30-year-olds that are Paul supporters, I think if they really took their time and looked at the things that this guy has said over the years, he's not really a true Republican.
Hey, Doug, how old are you?
I'm 65 years old.
So you're not some young, dumb, misguided college kid. You're a presidential historian. You've worked in presidential administrations. I mean, Mike, you're talking to a guy, pretty smart guy, Doug Wead. What do you know that Doug Wead doesn't know about Ron Paul?
Okay. What about when he said when Obama went after bin Laden? That was a great victory for the United States of America. He came out and said it was wrong what we did. I can't understand how that is possible.
Doug?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you something very, very interesting. The CIA head, Michael Scherer, the CIA head of the Osama bin Laden unit that just retired, endorsed Ron Paul for president. There's got to be a big story behind that.
But it is a fair question as to wonder why would Ron Paul criticize our killing of the world's most feared terrorist?
because he felt we should have killed him immediately. He felt that he was not killed immediately. The CIA units were not allowed to do what they were supposed to do because contractors and others wanted the war in Iraq, and they didn't want him taken out too quickly. He felt that Osama bin Laden was responsible for this. He immediately voted that we should go after Osama bin Laden, and he thought he should have been killed several years ago.
All right, let's take some more. Let's take some more phone calls. Doug Wead is joining us. He's supporting Ron Paul. He was special assistant to President H.W. Bush to the Bush White House. He's worked with presidents. Presidential historian Nathan, you're next up on the Mike Gallagher Show, talking about this phenomenon that is Ron Paul and his candidacy. Hey, Nathan, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Mike?
Great, sir. Glad you called.
I love your show.
Thank you.
And I agree with you. It is a legitimate conversation because the people speak, and the people, if he's doing well in the polls, we should discuss this. But I think the reason why he is popular is because people are focusing basically on domestic policy here, and they don't know that as foreign policy. And I think his foreign policy, is where he is dangerous. I saw recently in a pretty publicized article about a journalist, I forgot his name, that went over to him after a speech and asked him if he's in 1939 and he's FDR, would he bomb the trains going to Auschwitz? And without flinching, he said no, he would not intervene. So he just looked at him in the eye and said no. I think that's pretty dangerous. What would he do with Iran?
All right,
he wouldn't intervene. He said it repeatedly.
Yeah. All right, let's get Doug's response here, and we lost his cell, so we're going to get him back up here on the line real quick and see what Doug has to say about the idea that Ron Paul would not have intervened if Adolf Hitler returned, and that is a big concern. I will be very blunt and talk about my deep concerns over Ron Paul's suggestion that we shouldn't be a staunch supporter and ally of Israel. You know, Ron Paul has a very fierce, I think, sort of libertarian, constitutionalist, nationalistic streak. And that's, on the one hand, admirable and refreshing. On the other hand, in a world that leads to chaos, if we let terrorists have their way with us, that could be problematic. We'll continue with Doug Wead. Also, my conversation with J.C. Watts. He's on the... We've been visiting with Doug Wead, who's a presidential historian. He's a Ron Paul advisor, supports Ron Paul's candidacy, and I know we had a little bit of cell phone problem there with you, Doug. We got you back. And I want to, you've worked with so many Republican presidents, and I think it's safe to suggest that the Republican presidents you've worked with would believe in a staunch alliance and partnership and support of the state of Israel. And I think much of the criticism of Ron Paul stems from his sort of isolationist approach in terms of foreign policy and his, I think, refusal to want to be Israel's ally. Is that where a lot of the criticism comes from? And how do you make that shift from having worked with both George Bush's and Jerry Ford and all of that, and studying Ronald Reagan and all? How do you reconcile their staunch support of Israel with Ron Paul's lack thereof?
Well, there's two issues there. One, a lot of people are gaming the system, the Pentagon contractor system. That's number one. I mean, we've got boots on the ground in China, supposedly because China, are boots on the ground in Australia, supposedly because China's threatening Australia. I'm getting calls from friends in Australia, Skype calls, who are saying, wait a second, why would China loan money to the United States to defend Australia from China if they had designs on it? So number one, there's a feeling that the corruption, the level of corruption, has reached insanity. But as to Israel, I've had many conversations with Ron Paul about Israel. I was the vice chairman of Christians and Jews United for Israel back in the 70s. I wouldn't support him if I had any doubts about this. He believes we have two commitments to Israel. The first, to share intelligence is mutually agreed upon, and second, to maintain that Israel has a quantitative edge in weaponry in the Middle East. Other than that, he tells me, and he says, look, the two cardinal tenets of Zionism is self-reliance and self-determination. And the borrower is servant to the lender. Because we give Israel $3 billion a year, Israel has to do everything we tell them to do. Presidents can announce their bargaining positions even before there's negotiation. That offends him. He thinks it's wrong. In 1981, he was the only public figure to stand up and defend Israel when she took out the nuclear reactors to defend herself, the nuclear facilities in Iraq. And so this is his view. We give $3 billion a year to Israel. We give $20 billion a year to Israel's avowed enemies who will drive her into the sea. So I don't know. I think it's an arguable position.
Doug Wead, do you get a lot of flack from your conservative and your Republican colleagues for your support of and your endorsement and your role in the Ron Paul campaign?
Not after we discuss it, I don't. Not after we discuss it.
So you win them all over, huh?
Well, I don't know. It's just mathematical sense. I mean, you give Israel $3 billion, you give her enemies $20 billion. I don't see how it benefits Israel.
But again, big picture. A lot of Republicans are annoyed and bothered and perplexed by Ron Paul's candidacy. You got to be getting a lot of blowback from friends and colleagues of yours for your enthusiastic support of Ron Paul. You just got to be.
I don't get blowback. I get little winks and nods from them saying, keep it up, it's corrupt, it's never been this bad. I mean, here's the guy, people are they're gaming the system, K Street and the bribes and the lobbyists and the Wall Street and then the Fed dishing out money directly to companies in addition to banks, hundreds of billions of dollars, interest-free loans, while they make these poor kids pay 8%, 12% on their college loans. And Ron Paul's just like a clean ship in a sea of garbage. He came to Washington. If you created a figure like this in a novel, nobody'd believe it. Won't take bribes, won't take a dime from the lobbyists, won't participate in the Congressional Pension Fund, won't go on junkets, won't vote for pay raises for himself. He's incorruptible. He's a better man than I would be in his same position. And he's a man we need right now because while we've always had corruption, we've never had it quite at the levels it is now, with the elitists taking the money and the little people, as Leona Helmsley, paying the taxes.
Doug Wead, you're a passionate advocate for Ron Paul, and you certainly do a great job on his behalf, and I've respected what you've represented for many, many years, and I appreciate you spending a few minutes with us here on the Mike Gallagher Show on the campaign trail. South Carolina, very, very important for Ron Paul. How do you suspect he does there in the Palmetto State?
Well, we're in for the long haul. We think that as long as a few of these other candidates get winnowed out, and some will in South Carolina, they'll eventually benefit us. And we're going on because we represent a cause. And a lot of people haven't noticed. You've talked about it, but a lot of people haven't noticed we're reshaping the Republican Party in a way that hasn't happened since the 1980s when the evangelical Christians
I'm just a firm believer in letting the people speak. I'm just a firm believer in respecting the will of citizenry. And I just get tired of seeing people disqualified because they're Ron Paul supporters. I heard one reporter point out the other day that he went to a Ron Paul party, I guess it was in New Hampshire after the primary was over, and the reporter was asked, well, who was there? He goes, people of all walks of life, young, old, white, black, military. I'm sorry, there is a phenomenon here, and I'm not going to ignore it, and I'm glad that you could spend some time with us advocating for your guy. Doug Wead, thank you for joining us here on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Thank you so much, Mike.
All right, you bet. Appreciate it very much. And from Ron Paul to Newt Gingrich.